sense that they are putting pressure on Zelensky to accept this, frankly, very one-sided proposal that
Trump just reignited global controversy with a bold statement on Crimea. And this time, he's pointing fingers at Ukraine's own president, Volodymyr Zelensky. As the war drags on and diplomacy stalls, Trump's comments are sparking outrage across the West. Could Crimea really go to Russia? Is Trump signaling a major foreign policy shift? Or is this just political theater? Let's break down the tension and the truth behind it. To understand the weight behind Trump's latest comments on Crimea, we first need to revisit one of the most controversial chapters in modern European history. In early 2014, following political unrest in Ukraine and the ousting of its pro-Russian president, Russian troops entered and swiftly took control of Crimea, a strategically vital peninsula jutting into the Black Sea. Within weeks, Moscow held a referendum claiming that the Crimean people voted to join Russia. The results were declared overwhelmingly in favor of annexation, but the vote was held under Russian military occupation and was internationally condemned as illegal and illegitimate. Since then, Crimea has remained under Russian control, but the vast majority of the world, including the United States and the European Union, still officially recognize it as Ukrainian territory. For Ukraine, Crimea isn't just a piece of land. It's a symbol of national sovereignty, identity, and resilience. For Russia, it's a crucial naval stronghold, home to its Black Sea Fleet, and a point of pride for Putin's administration. The annexation triggered a wave of Western sanctions against Russia and marked the start of a much larger conflict that eventually erupted into the full-scale war we see today between Russia and Ukraine. With tens of thousands killed and millions displaced, Crimea remains both a physical and political flashpoint. Ukraine has repeatedly pledged to reclaim Crimea, either through diplomacy or force. And Western allies have backed that position, calling for a complete withdrawal of Russian forces from all occupied Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. However, not everyone shares that view. Some political voices in the US and Europe have suggested that a negotiated peace may require Ukraine to give up Crimea. Though such suggestions are deeply unpopular and divisive. Now, with Trump speaking out, suggesting that Crimea could fall under Russian control and possibly placing blame on Zelensky, this long-standing issue is once again front and center. Donald Trump's recent remarks have once again thrown him into the center of a geopolitical storm. In an interview that quickly went viral, Trump criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and made a provocative suggestion that Crimea might end up with Russia, and that Zelensky himself could be partially to blame. While Trump didn't explicitly endorse Russia's claim to Crimea, his wording hinted at a willingness to accept the reality of its annexation. He implied that had Ukraine's leadership acted differently or more strategically, Russia might never have taken Crimea in the first place. He also questioned whether continuing to fight for the peninsula was worth the risk of World War III, a phrase that echoed concerns about escalating Western involvement in the region. The backlash was immediate. U.S. officials, especially within the Biden administration, condemned Trump's remarks as reckless and damaging to America's global standing. Democrats accused him of undermining Ukrainian sovereignty and playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin. Even some Republicans distanced themselves, stressing that the U.S. should remain firmly committed to Ukraine's territorial integrity. Internationally, NATO allies expressed concern that such statements could weaken diplomatic unity and embolden the Kremlin. The timing of Trump's comments also drew criticism, coming as Ukraine faces immense pressure on the battlefield and continues to rely on Western support for military aid and reconstruction funding. This isn't the first time Trump has been accused of being soft on Russia. During his presidency, he repeatedly cast doubt on Russian election interference and even sided with Putin over U.S. intelligence agencies during a 2018 summit in Helsinki. His past admiration for Putin's leadership style and skepticism toward NATO commitments continue to raise questions about how he would handle foreign policy if re-elected. Trump's latest comments have opened old wounds and sparked new fears. Is he signaling a possible shift in U.S. policy toward Crimea? Or is this just another example of Trump using blunt language to stir political headlines? Either way, the message has been heard loud and clear. in Kyiv, in Moscow, and across the globe. In the face of Trump's remarks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his administration have stood firm. Though he didn't directly name Trump in his response, Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine's territorial integrity is non-negotiable and that Crimea, like every inch of occupied Ukrainian land, will be reclaimed. Speaking at a recent press conference, Zelensky stated, "We will not trade land for peace. Crimea is Ukraine. It was, it is, and it will remain ours." His words were backed by the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which called any suggestion of ceding territory to Russia dangerous appeasement. Ukrainians across social media and in major cities like Kyiv and Lviv expressed outrage over Trump's comments. Many accused him of dismissing their suffering and undermining years of resistance against Russian aggression. Protest banners and digital campaigns have since emerged declaring, "Crimea is not a bargaining chip." Zelensky also reaffirmed Ukraine's commitment to its Western allies. He praised bipartisan U.S. support for Ukraine, subtly signaling that Trump's opinion doesn't reflect official American policy, at least for now. This reassurance was critical, especially as Ukraine continues to rely heavily on international aid, defense equipment, and political backing to hold its ground against Russian forces. More than just defending territory, Zelensky's response was a message to the world. Ukraine will not be pressured into surrender, no matter who makes the suggestion. Former U.S. president or not, the answer remains the same. For Kyiv, the fight for Crimea isn't about politics, it's about justice, sovereignty, and survival. Trump's statement about Crimea isn't just a foreign policy flashpoint, it's a calculated political move as he eyes the 2024 election. As always, Trump knows how to dominate headlines, stir controversy, and draw clear lines between himself and the political establishment. By questioning Zelensky and suggesting Crimea could belong to Russia, Trump is appealing to a segment of the American electorate that's growing weary of sending billions in aid to Ukraine. In doing so, he's positioning himself as the anti-war candidate, someone who promises to end foreign entanglements and put America first, even if it means stepping away from long-held U.S. diplomatic positions. But this strategy is risky. While isolationist rhetoric may energize Trump's base, it creates divisions within the Republican Party. Figures like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and others still support Ukraine, seeing Russian aggression as a global threat. Trump's words could split the GOP, especially on Capitol Hill, where Ukraine funding remains a hot-butter issue. Democrats, meanwhile, are using the moment to paint Trump as dangerously sympathetic to Putin, echoing criticisms from his first term. President Biden has doubled down on his support for Zelensky, pledging unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and warning that dictators cannot redraw borders by force. Foreign policy rarely decides U.S. elections, but in a globalized world, and with the Ukraine war far from over, Trump's stance on Crimea may shape how voters see his leadership style, judgment, and alliances. Is he a bold truth-teller unafraid to challenge the status quo? Or is he destabilizing global norms for political gain? Either way, his statement about Crimea wasn't just about a peninsula. It was a message to voters, rivals, and world leaders alike. If Crimea were officially ceded to Russia, whether through a negotiated settlement or by force, the consequences would ripple far beyond Ukraine's borders. It would mark the first time in decades that internationally recognized European territory was redrawn by military conquest and accepted by major powers. The precedent? Dangerous. For Ukraine, the loss of Crimea would be devastating, not just in terms of territory, but in morale, national identity, and long-term security. It would validate Russia's use of force and weaken Ukraine's case for reclaiming other occupied regions. It could also undermine President Zelensky's leadership, especially if the public sees the move as a betrayal of the lives lost during years of war. NATO and the European Union would face a serious test of credibility. If Western powers accept the new status quo, it could embolden not just Russia, but other authoritarian regimes watching closely. It might signal that borders are negotiable, if you're powerful enough to defy them. The United States would also face global blowback. A shift in U.S. policy, especially under a future Trump administration, could shatter the Western alliance's unity, Allies in Eastern Europe, particularly the Baltic states, would likely feel more vulnerable. Trust in America's commitments could erode, just as China eyes Taiwan and other territorial disputes simmer worldwide. Economically, sanctions against Russia would become harder to maintain, and diplomatically, a world where brute force wins could lead to increased instability in regions far beyond Europe. In short, if Crimea goes to Russia, it doesn't just end a war, it opens the door to more conflict. And that's why this issue remains one of the most dangerous and defining questions in global politics today.